Welcome to Founders Unplugged, hosted by Greg McCallum. Long-form, honest conversations with founders and entrepreneurs from around the world. This is part 2 of this episode. Be sure to check out part 1 if you haven't already. Link in the description.
What am I drinking? You want to know what this is?
I did actually want to ask that. Yes, I did see that a moment ago.
It's my youth elixir.
Okay.
Yeah, no,
That
it's
explains
a protein smoothie with. It does have antioxidants in it.
I was going to say, why is it green? Is it green?
It's green from spinach and also blue from blueberries or purple.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm sure it's great, but it looks terrifying.
Mm-hmm. But you'd never guess I'm turning 50 next month.
Well, there you go. So that's clearly the secret. That and yoga. Yeah, for sure.
There you go.
Yeah, I did actually want to ask you about yoga, just more anecdotally, because I've thought about doing it for years. But do you know what is interesting that's always put me a little bit off it? Is kind of the spiritual side of it a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For example, I have really bad neck and back pains, and I go to massage therapists, and I've tried lots of different ones over the years. And the minute they lose me as a customer is when they start talking about chakras and my and aligning. No, I'm just like, look, I'm just here to get my back rubbed, lady. Like, don't try and indoctrinate me into your cult. Like, what I just make my back feel good. Yeah. Like, how you mentioned that when you were sort of going on your journey of like becoming an instructor, that you got introduced more to the spiritual thing. Like, how did that align with you? And not to pry too much into your way of thinking.
No, not at all. I was like, I don't want to hear this.
Oh, really?
Yeah. No. So the type of yoga that I do is more like it's vinyasa flow, which is more like power yoga. You're moving pretty quickly. You get your heart rate up. It's, it's more of a workout. And I like that because I don't want to be still with my thoughts and
who wants to do
get
that?
Messages from the universe. Like, no, thank you.
Yeah,
like,
I have
that's
enough
very
messages.
uncomfortable. No, in fact, it was so bad, Greg. When I first, the first couple of years I did it, I would leave at the end when everyone's lying in Shavasana and just lying there on their mat. I would get up and leave because I couldn't do that part of the practice. So yeah, I felt very uncomfortable with it. But I felt like there was, I don't want to get too woo-woo, but I felt like there was just a bigger purpose in me being there. And even if I didn't fully understand it or appreciate it or even want to do it, I just needed to kind of sit with it.
Right.
And
sort of like give yourself over to it a little bit.
Yeah. But it's really hard for me. I do think, because I'd be interested to know, like a decade from now, where are you? I think as you age, you maybe get a little more comfortable with some of those concepts and give yourself more permission to explore. That's been my experience. Kind of, you were talking about when you're young, you're super liberal. When you're older, you're more conservative. I think as I'm getting older, I'm also getting more open to exploring spirituality.
Right.
And based on the reading I've done, that's very normal. Like that's a common adult developmental milestone.
Yeah, and I suppose that has something to do with thinking more about our own mortality, right?
As
we get older, we
more.
think, right, yeah, you see and experience more of life, but I think there is something very tangible there as well, which is that especially once you have kids and a family and people around you start to age and maybe even people around you start to die, you do start to see, you come face to face a little bit more with what could potentially be on the other side. And just a very practical level, to take it back to fear, right? I mean, like, this is the thesis as to why religion exists at all, is because of the fear of death. And so, I think that happens to all of us on an individual level. Like my brother, for example, we were both raised atheist, agnostic, by a Jewish mother and a Protestant father, right? So we were, and they were both non-practicing anyway, but they just both raised us to be that way. But my brother, after his friend passed away from cancer, and he's in his 40s, so that and passed away in his 40s, he started turning more towards Christianity, which was a completely like unexpected thing. Like no signals were there at all. But his partner is Polish, and they're quite orthodox, religious family, and he just started getting. He was like, I'm just finding it interesting, and would go to church, and then next thing you know, he's wearing the cross, and he's like, no, this is my thing now, and I'm like, fair enough. Like you found your peace, and you found your way of still being able to maintain a relationship with your deceased friend. Fair enough. I can't criticize that. Well, I can. I always find a way because this is me. But you know what I mean. In essence, in principle, I can't.
You understand it.
I understand it. Doesn't necessarily mean I agree with it, but I understand it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I think that's something that's lost these days, is the ability to understand something while also not agreeing with it. It's like you have to be on one side or the other, right?
Totally. Yes. Nuance is lost.
Nuance is 100% lost, yeah. Which is 100% why I love having these conversations, because I think it's important to try and bring that back, and you can only really do that. Time is needed for that. A lot of our interactions these days are so rushed. You know what I mean? We're constantly trying to find shorter and shorter ways of communicating with each other, it seems.
Totally. Well, especially with so many things over Zoom or Teams, because you just want to get off. Like, it's like, oh gosh, I have to do another Zoom call.
The list is this long of things I have to do. I need to get to that list. Do you guys fully work remotely? Do you have an office?
We are.
You are. That's interesting.
Prior to COVID, we had co-working space here in Cincinnati for those of us who were in Cincinnati. And then obviously gave that up during COVID. And then when things started to open back up, we resubscribed, but nobody was using it. And then we'd hire a new person and they would want co-working space as part of their, employment. So we'd resubscribe. Nobody would use it. So we just keep trying and nobody use it. And honestly, I'm very happy working from home. So I think if I maybe was wired a little differently, maybe I would push it. But also we just hired people who aren't here. So it's kind of unfair to the people who live in Seattle or Texas or DC or whatever.
What are some of the challenges there of being able to build the company that you want to build and the culture you want to build while also building it remote? Like that presents some pretty unique challenges, right?
But I mean, there's a lot of blueprints we can follow. So we're not the only one doing this. So we do try to travel and get together and see each other. Usually people who don't live in Cincinnati come here. My leadership team, we don't do it weekly, but they'll come over to my house for the weekly leadership meeting. So we'll see each other then. We're on Slack, like a lot of other companies. I mean, there are pros and cons to both models. And especially, I mean, a lot of us are working parents. And we have a lot of working parents of children under the age of 3.
Right.
Again, we're a small team, but yeah. So I know being able to work from home and not have to have that commute really helps. Yeah.
Absolutely. Is it? Well, I mean, it's interesting. The startup that I'm building and have been building for a while now is getting quite strong in its numbers behind the scenes. We're in stealth now. We'll be out of stealth probably by the time this airs. I don't know, but that's
exciting.
Yeah, thank you. And and it's not my first rodeo in helping build remote first startups, but this is the first as a CEO. And it's interesting. I think one of the philosophies that I'm trying to bring into it is similar to what we were just touching on there, which is while it's important to be efficient with our time, it's okay to intentionally be inefficient if it means if it can benefit the overall culture and the individual experience, right? And that's a really difficult thing to try and put down in a playbook. I think you really have to trust individuals to make those calls and treat everyone like adults to make those decisions when they see fit. But as great as it is to say no meeting should go over 30 minutes long, nothing's that important, everything can be in an email. It's like, yeah, but people also need time just to talk shit.
Right.
Like, people need that meeting to just talk nonsense with each other and not talk, work. Because everything in the diary is so focused on outcome. It's like the purpose of this meeting is to accomplish this. The purpose is, and so on. It's like, where's that meeting to make up for the fact that we're not eating lunch together, in person, and having drinks on a Friday afternoon and all that kind of stuff. Like we need to factor that in. So
get to know each other as humans, because it's hard to lead as a human if you don't know each other as humans.
And also, I think some of the best ideas come out in those times, right? So, like, I just think back to some of my career moves and the jobs that I've had. Some of the best ideas we come up for the entire company that made the company, successful in the first place were on cigarette breaks. When I'd be chatting to the CEO outside and we'd be having a cigarette and then be like, should we do this? Should we do that? Yeah, wait, that's a brilliant idea. Let's do, like you just don't know when that inspiration's going to come, and you can only really get there through exploration and conversation. Some of the time, it's not always that obvious.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Totally.
So, yeah. What are some of the plans that you guys have for the future? Can you sort of say, is it much of the same? Have you got some big swings that you can talk to us about?
Yeah. So I would say the incremental plans. So we have this third book coming out. And then our solution right now is really kind of geared toward chief product officers or the executives who are trying to build like a product organization for the first time. But it's focused on kind of building those product management, test and learn capabilities. With the new book, we believe there's a market opportunity to serve marketing and sales executives at the same companies that are productizing, and teach them then how do you go to market with solutions that have both products and services, or how do you go to market with products only. So we are in the middle right now. This week we kicked it off of testing with a group of charter advisors what that might look like. And we'll be doing a series of meetings with them across the next month to flesh that out. So that's exciting. And again, our research says we're back in that zone of something we're good at. There's a need. There are a lot of resources out there on how to sell products, but usually like from a product native, tech native standpoint, not when you're doing it within the larger context of a services organization where your existing go-to-market motions are geared towards services, not products. So that's exciting. And then I think it's the less incremental is then how do we use technology more to scale both of our solutions? Because again, there's a heavy advisory component in both of those. I don't know if we will, but it's something we're exploring as much as we can. Again, because we're bootstrapped, so all of our innovation is funded through existing cash flow, very similar to most of our clients.
Yeah, so you've got to be ambitious but realistic with what your roadmap can look like, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's exciting. So we'll have to keep an eye on when is the third book coming out? Is it out
End
already?
of September. Yeah, September. So a month from now.
So by the time this comes out, I think it should be around that. I can't remember the dates, but so yeah, we'll include the links anyway. I'm sure. So you touched on something. Sorry, just to go completely off the rails, which, as you've noticed, is the way my brain works.
I love it. Bring it on. Yeah.
You mentioned something earlier which I thought was interesting, and it's a topic that's very close to my heart. You talked about going back to culture a little bit. You mentioned about how there was a lot of organizations you work with that didn't feel like they were as inclusive as they could have been. This is a topic that's huge right now, right? Inclusivity, this area of DEI, all of this mess of people talking about things, and it's quite a deeply divisive topic. And like I said, one that I have very strong opinions about. But I'm curious, especially being in the States and being really let's be honest, the country that exported a lot of this stuff to the rest of the Western world. Like, what's the general sort of atmosphere like now with these sort of things, considering that a lot of it's kind of it boomed, and then a lot of people are saying now it's kind of on the decline a little bit in some forms, or people have found ways in which it works versus others. And what do you see? What did you really mean when you were saying about inclusivity? Because I think everyone has a slightly different interpretation of that, right?
Yeah, it's a great question. So let me caveat all of this by saying I'm not a DE&I expert. This is not an issue I've studied closely. Yeah. So I'm not keeping up with the trends beyond kind of what I read in the, mainstream media. I have clients, however, who are like part of the services that they provide are around this area. So I maybe have a little bit of a different perspective because I work with clients who advise on DE&I or DE&I adjacent topics. And certainly there's a backlash right now. As you see, Fortune 500 companies eliminating positions who used to be responsible for DE&I or equity inclusion or whatever title they gave them. You've got in the US, the Supreme Court decision banning affirmative action in college admission decisions.
Oh, really? I didn't hear about that. Is that quite recent?
Yes. And now we're starting to see that show up in the numbers. So there was a headline, I think it was yesterday's paper or 2 days ago, about MIT in Boston. The makeup of their incoming freshman class is half Asian, and a significant decline in both Black and Hispanic students this year compared to previous years. So I don't know. Again, I am way over my ski tips now. Like, I'm not an expert in this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I for one thing, I welcome that news. Right? Yeah. And it might sound a bit controversial to say, given the numbers you've just given, but in context, I think that's a really good thing. And if people were to look into that, I would actively encourage them to do that. I think they'd see why, because I think that actually it was way more detrimental to have those policies in place for the very communities that they were claiming to help than it was to help them. So I didn't know that. That's, for me, I think that's good news for the American education system. But there's still a lot more work that needs to be done to then solve that problem.
On either side.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Yeah.
But now we're starting to see kind of the outcome of that Supreme Court decision in the makeup of at least MIT's freshman class, for example, was the kind of the hypothesis that the article was putting forward. So I think it's a very interesting, right? We can't ignore what's happening politically in the U.S. either.
Right. Yes.
And
no one can.
Right. I just like full stop there, but like things are going on, and it may influence the conversation further on this. So all that said, when Nicole and I started the business, when we talked about inclusive, it's very interesting. We've had to kind of confront this truth since then. It was still with a very non-inclusive lens. We were talking specifically about us, white working moms. And we felt like we had been in environments where, as white working moms, we were perhaps overlooked, not as supported as perhaps we could have been, not accommodated enough, whatever gripe was at the time. And I use the word gripe not to like diminish, because it was certainly maternity policies and parental leave policies and things like that have come a long way since when I first had children. So I think it's gotten better for working parents, mothers and fathers in the US. It's still nowhere near similar to the policies you have in the UK. And the cost of childcare is still a real problem for even all the way up to upper middle class families in the United States. That's a problem
here too, unfortunately. While the workplace policies are pretty decent, the cost of childcare is a problem for sure.
So that's what we were talking about when we said inclusive, which is not inclusive, right? But at the time we were like, oh, we're going to say inclusivity is one of our values. And then we were like, oh, what do? We just created a company with a bunch of people that look exactly like us, which we did.
Hi, a friendly reminder to share this episode with your network, like, and subscribe. And if you are feeling really supportive, please consider reviewing the show on the podcast platform of your choice. It all really helps support what we do. Thank you. Now back to the show.
And then I was like, we're not being inclusive. And because one of our beliefs is that we develop better ideas and more innovative solutions for clients when we're kind of fishing from a bigger pool. We had to consciously re-examine what we meant by inclusive, and were we really going to hold this out as a value? And if so, how are we going to continue to evolve? And that is still a very in progress conversation.
And I think so it should be. It just fascinates me that I've never, and look, I've not been on this earth for very long in the grand scheme of things, but how in the last 5 years I've heard race talked about and gender talked about more than I had done in any other point in my life. Mm-hmm. When prior to that, the main conversation was about the content of character. Mm-hmm. And it's troublesome to me. I wrote an article recently about diversity of thought and my opinions on that. And that's pretty much, I think, where I've landed on this topic now. I'd certainly be interested in your take on it, but essentially looking at how, if diversity, the reason why diversity is important within a workforce and in an organization is because of the different viewpoints it can bring and for the different ways it can solve problems, then surely race and gender and sexual orientation have absolutely nothing to do with it. It's about diversity of thought. In which case, that surely the goal should just be to get people with a diverse range of thought processes and approaches.
Partially. I agree partially with what you're saying. So I think, and again, I'm not an expert, just a business owner. But I think race, gender, sexual orientation are types of diversity. And because of structural inequities may change the lived experience of people who are a different gender, race, or sexual orientation than you are. But that is the tip of the iceberg of diversity. And to get diversity of thought, you need diversity of, even socioeconomic experience, work experience, skill set, like, neurodivergent plus neurotypical, like all different, like there's so many different flavors of diversity. So to just focus on those things that you can see is limiting your ability to get what I agree with you with, which is diversity of thought. Now, here's a really interesting quandary. As a small company, it is easier and more effective to run it in the near term with people who are a lot like me, or people who I used to work with, for example, who I already trust and know their skill sets and know their weaknesses. So then it's
that's like most people build their companies at first. You go with the people you know, right?
Exactly. But are you getting diversity of thought with that? Probably not as much, right? But that's another thing. So we've hired a lot of our former colleagues because it's just easier and more effective to run the company that way.
Right.
And from a diversity standpoint of what you can see, they may look different from us, from Nicole and I. But in fact, we are just birds of a feather, right? We all worked for the same company for 10, 15, 20 years. We use the same acronyms. We know exactly what the other person's talking about. We all know each other's strengths and weaknesses.
But doesn't that just mean you work well together?
Could. But it could also mean that we're just in this great loop of like doing things the same old way we've always done them.
But by the sounds of it, you're not. Like just based on what you've described to me of your business, what you've accomplished, and what you're aiming to, that doesn't sound to be the case. I mean, in my view, the proof's in the pudding, right? Like at the end of the day, and I think this is why this topic concerns me as much as it does, because it runs the risk of overanalyzing something which necessarily doesn't need to be overanalyzed. If the outcome is a good outcome, then that's kind of the end of the story, in my view. And why it worries me so much is you can get, a lineup of 10 white women, 10 white men, 10 black women, 10 women that all seemingly look the same. And what we're basically now saying is you're all the same. And that's, I think, a massive insult to individualism and individual lived experience. You know what I mean? I don't know. I could go on for this a long time. I'm sure this is like the least interesting subject we've discussed so far for you. But it's just...
I'm happy to talk about it. Again, it's just, I'm not an expert in this area.
Nor am I. But I don't think that we should feel like we have to be experts in order to talk about it. We're human beings. And I think we're entitled to have our opinions about it. And this is the interesting part of this conversation too, I've noticed, is that, it seems like a lot of divisive topics now in the world, people who have an opinion on them are told to be quiet unless they're an expert. And it's like, what tells you you need to be an expert to talk about? I think you're absolutely entitled to have an opinion as a
No, I don't think I need to be an expert to talk about something, but I also just want to be clear. I'm playing with limited information.
Right.
So a lot of the things that talk about are based on my own lived experience, which is valid. What I read in the New York Times, what I read in the Wall Street Journal. It's about it. It's all I have time for right now. So that I think that's important because it may mean I don't have the full picture.
Well, none of us do on anything, but that doesn't negate our ability to navigate some things with a certain level of confidence, especially if we're approaching it from a human perspective, right? First and foremost, like you're saying about managing with leadership and running a company with leadership through the human lens. I mean, you don't know all humans, but you can still do that, right? So I just see it as the same as kind of like an extension to that. I think as long as we're leading with and approaching this topic as with any others with empathy and with humans at the forefront of our thinking, then yeah, we're not going to have all the information. We're just doing our best, right? At the end of the day. And in the same way that I'm talking, and while I've got strong, I agree with you. While I've got strong opinions on this too, I say, look, I'm not everyone in the world. Right. It doesn't mean I can't have an opinion.
But I also want people to know that I'm very open to hearing additional information.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, I kind of like you and I, we're broadcasting out. This is not a group conversation. We're not facilitating a town hall on this. People aren't able to comment, right? And so in some ways, we're in a bit of a privileged position that we're broadcasting out your opinions. And I just want to make sure that the listeners know mine is a narrow experience. It's still valid.
Right.
But I'm very much open to hearing other perspectives.
You're aware of the shortcomings potentially that you have. Yeah, and that's fair. And yeah, I suppose we all have that, right, on any topic, but especially one that's this divisive, I guess. It's
but it shouldn't be, right? Because it's like, I know, but it's back to like nuance has been
Everything
lost.
is divisive now.
Yeah.
Everything is divisive now, which is crazy. What is the atmosphere like from a business owner perspective, given the sort of political situation in the States? Just to sort of switch into that lane a little bit, because as a business owner, obviously, who's in office will always have a certain impact. No, does it not really concern you too much as a business owner?
I mean,
in terms of...
I'm not taking out debt, so interest rates don't really affect me right now. Certainly, how much my prospective client base is, how they're doing, that might be affected by interest rates. But we're so small. Like, if you can't figure out how to make money at our size, like, you shouldn't be in business. So there's always going to be pockets of the market that have budget if you have a compelling value proposition. We're just not big enough to be subject to the whims of policy right now, unless there was some like the infrastructure bill, like we're going to have a productization government spending bill, right? No, that's not going to happen.
You never know. Elon Musk is putting himself forward to be involved, since so you never know what he might come out with.
Right? Yeah,
you might get a phone call. No,
we're pretty immune from it.
Okay.
So it's not to say we're not following what's going on, but it should not affect our fortunes. Yeah.
Good. I did want to ask you about something else as well, which we mentioned right at the beginning in part one, which was we were talking about our kids, right? And and you also touched on it briefly there when we were talking about kind of inclusivity, and you were saying about how a lot of your employees are parents themselves. Do you think that there is what are some of the main differences or struggles that you as a parent have in trying to balance things as a business owner, especially when you're starting a business, compared to do you sort of look back and often think I should have done this sooner, like when I didn't have the kids around? Like, what are some of the unique attributes there or situations that you find yourself in? That,
I mean, any business owner knows you end up working way more than you thought you would,
right?
And I'm fine with that. So first of all, my situation is a little unique in that I've always been the primary breadwinner and have had a partner who's been the primary child care provider, not 100%, but the default parent. That's not true for a lot of women my age. So that I think that's important to acknowledge.
Right.
And I love to work. Just love it. So working long hours has never fazed me. What what is harder with children is the flexibility of when I work those hours. So it's very important to me that from like 6:30 a.m. to 8 a.m., I'm able to be fully present for my kids and, get them up, get them fed, get them in a good mood before they go off to school, maybe drive them to school when they still needed a ride, all of that. And then the after kind of hours, and that, can be, depending on extracurricular activities, could start as early as 3:30 in the afternoon.
Right.
So it's the flexibility to kind of be able to compartmentalize and not have work bleed into time when I'm really trying to be present, especially with teenagers. I mean, oh my gosh, Greg, they're so unpredictable.
I can't wait.
No, it's a friggin' nightmare.
Especially with the attitude my 9-year-old already has. Like,
yeah.
ugh.
And, and then like when they get social lives, but I don't know how it is in the UK. You have better public transport than we have in Cincinnati, but then they need rides everywhere. But, so I had like a part-time job as a driver of teenagers where I would drive them all to Olive Garden, which
like
is
an Uber driver.
Yeah, like a very low-end Italian restaurant here in the US. I would sit in the
it's a bit of a meme, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd sit in the parking lot for an hour while they went in there and ate their unlimited breadsticks. Then they'd get back in my car and I would drive them to a football game, drop them off, maybe drive around for an hour and a half, go home, come back, pick them up. I mean, it's just exhausting. Yeah. But when else in my life am I going to do this? Like, it's a tiny window of time.
Right.
And because I do own my own business and I can choose my clients and choose what I do mostly, then I can be there. And that's really all I wanted. I just wanted that ability to be there when I wanted to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I echo that. I suppose that is one of the privileges we have of being business owners and also the age of working from home too. It's nice to see that it's no longer a privilege reserved just for those at the top of the ladder, but also for those who may be just working and being able to sort of have flexible hours and so on too. It's still just, it breaks my heart a little bit that, of course, there are vastly more people who work in jobs where that isn't possible at all. That still breaks my heart. We are privileged to be in the corporate space full stop because it allows us to even do anything remotely like that.
Absolutely.
But not all workers, at least until Elon Musk builds all these autonomous robots that can do all manual labor for us. That's the way it's going to be. But yeah, and then and now they're older as well. I mean, do you think this is the time to have done it, right? Do you feel like you could have done what you've done in terms of launching this business when they were like 5?
Yeah, I didn't have the Rolodex. I mean, that's a dated term now, but I didn't have the professional network.
Well, let's say you did,
or the credentials.
Let's say you did. Do you think that would have been as possible though if they were that sort of age? Do you think you would have still just gone, do you know what? Screw it.
They were easier younger, and you could just. Yeah, I mean, you get a nanny, right? Yeah, it's a teenage years.
You're terrifying me now.
Yeah. No, and okay, so I was really lucky.
Is it too late to give them back?
No,
is that a thing?
You talk about mentors. Like, I had some really good mom mentors is what I called them. My next door neighbor, she was fabulous. So she had 2 boys who were, oh gosh, I want to say like maybe 8 and 10 years older than my kids.
Right.
And so she was just always telling me like, oh, like work really hard now because once they get to this age, like it's just so much more unpredictable. The type of support they need is just really harder to outsource. And ideas on how to stay connected to them as they age and things like that. So I feel very lucky that I've had people like her and others who've kind of shown me the way they did it and what worked and what didn't.
Do you know, that's really interesting too, because when it comes to, going back to what I was saying about being paid to be ignored for a living, one area in which people generally are really push back on advice tends to be around parenting. Right. People, especially if it's unsolicited. But generally speaking, people are terrified of seeming like they're not good parents by asking for advice. And it's so bizarre to me. Like, it is the most unknown, most complicated, most difficult thing to do. And yet no one really is willing to to just even ask their own parents who have done it and been there, like, what did you do in this situation? What advice do you have for me? It's like, how dare you tell me how to, be a parent? Are you trying to tell me I'm not a good mum or a good dad? It's like, it's crazy how fragile our egos are when it comes to being parents. You know what I mean? Compared to anything else, we would ask for advice most of the time, but not for that one. So fair play to you for having the cojones, as they say, to which probably isn't a very gender friendly thing. Anyway, I don't care. You know what I mean? Like, fair play to you, because that isn't an easy thing to ask for help with. But I think that speaks to your broader makeup, your personality, given everything else you've told me about yourself, that you are, like you say, very open to new information and new ways of doing things, which I think you need to be successful in this world, right?
Yeah, totally. If you think you have all the answers, forget about it.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Well, look, we're coming towards the end, because I know you have to jump off and you've got lots of important people to speak to. And I am still very, very thankful that you've taken as long as you have to speak with me today. I really, really do appreciate it, because I know how busy you are. And all that's left I wanted to say really to you is just, how amazing it is to meet you, how fantastic I think what you're doing is. And, I say this to most of the founders I speak to, and please don't take this as me being patronizing. It's really not. I mean what I'm saying when I say I'm incredibly impressed and proud of what you've accomplished. And I think the reason why I say that is because I don't think as business owners or founders, we hear that enough from one another. So I think we should all try and make the point of telling that, because I genuinely mean that. It's incredible what you've achieved. And I'm definitely going to be getting my hands on a couple of your books, because they sound right up my alley. So I'll definitely check them out.
Thank you, Greg. And I appreciate so much you saying that. And I receive it. I'm letting myself receive that and enjoy it. Yeah.
Good. Right?
Thank
I'm
you.
glad it was taken as intended, because I don't ever want to sound like, who the hell is this guy to be telling me like, he's not my dad. That's not what I thought. I mean, I just think it's important to share, especially as, someone who knows how difficult it is, and we should be telling that to each other as often as possible. Because it can be quite a thankless task, in the same way that being a parent can, being a husband, being a wife can. These things can be quite thankless. And so every now and then, I think we need to spread that love a little bit and that kindness, and let each other know. So all that's left to say is, obviously I'll put the link to your website, your books and everything in the description. Is there anywhere else people should be going to, you want to direct people to find out more about you and what you do?
Love to connect with people on LinkedIn. If they say they heard me on the podcast, happy to connect. So
brilliant.
I'm very active on LinkedIn. So if people want to connect there, that'd be great.
Brilliant. I'll put your LinkedIn profile in there too, so people can come and find you. And give my best to everyone, co-founders, staff, family, and good luck with your daughter on her journey in college. I hope it all goes well. And
thank you.
We'll definitely stay in touch.
Yeah, this was wonderful, Greg. It was just so great to have a more casual conversation, and I loved where we took it.
Good. I'm glad. That's music to my ears. I'm glad to hear it. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Well, wonderful. We'll definitely do it again soon. And hear about how things have gone in the interim. We'll definitely have to do that update. Yeah,
will do. I would love
awesome.
that. Yeah.
Have a lovely weekend and take care.
Thank you. You too, Greg.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening and/or watching. Please like and subscribe. Or if you are listening via podcasting service and want to show your support, consider rating or leaving a review. It really helps. See you next week.